The chief flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a blade, sharp and cold. "This man is in the wrong seat." Every head turned instantly toward Elias Munro. In that moment, no one knew they had just triggered a chain of events that would engulf not only a career, but the future of an entire airline. Elias sat still, his eyes as deep and calm as a lake, observing in silence. The 42-year-old, his hair flecked with grey, wore a charcoal hoodie and plain jeans. To fellow passengers, he looked no different from a middle-class businessman, perhaps traveling for work, or even just a rare upgrade courtesy of a loyalty program. No glittering symbols of wealth, no gold watch catching the light, no polished Italian leather shoes. Yet the quiet steadiness in his gaze hinted at something else. A power hidden beneath the surface that no one had yet noticed. Hours earlier, inside the luxurious Polaris lounge at Newark, Elias had sat in a quiet corner, reading a worn novel, its spine broken from years of revisiting. In the air filled with the scent of sandalwood and the clink of crystal glasses, he remained a still point among the whirl of privilege. He had no need for flashy armor to prove he belonged here. He had conquered the world through silence itself. For Elias was the founder of Neurosphere Technologies, the company that reshaped the very era of cloud computing and artificial intelligence. The financial press had once called him the architect of the future, and the $10 billion fortune was only the visible tip of the iceberg. Deeper still, his company was on the verge of signing a historic deal worth hundreds of millions with Global Lux Airlines, the very airline whose Flight 72 he was boarding. A contract that could lift the airline into the future or drag it down into collapse. When the boarding call rang out, Elias closed his book, took a sip of cold black coffee, and calmly walked to the gate. He handed over his first-class boarding pass for seat 1A, received a mechanical nod from the attendant, and stepped onto the jet bridge. None of them realized that his quiet footsteps carried the weight of the airline's destiny. Seat 1A revealed itself like a cocoon of luxury, Italian leather soft beneath the light, a 24-inch screen glowing dimly, a personal minibar tucked into the side. Elias slid his weathered leather backpack into the compartment, pulled off his hoodie to reveal a plain black t-shirt, and sat down. His heart beat slowly, not from a fear of flying, but from weariness with a world where success was measured in suits, not intellect. The cabin door opened and passengers filed in. A Japanese couple nodded politely. An English woman with silver hair settled in with regal ease. Then came the footsteps of Margaret Doyle, the chief flight attendant, echoing like gavel strikes on carpet. A woman in her 50s, her blonde bob cut sharp, her smile stiff. When her eyes landed on Elias, they stopped. Hoodie gone, but t-shirt, jeans, no designer logos. The glance lasted barely a heartbeat, yet Elias saw it clearly. The doubt, the disdain. He had seen that look thousands of times, in boardrooms where his ideas were underestimated, in ballrooms where his simplicity was dismissed by glittering eyes of wealth. "Would you like some champagne, sir?" Margaret asked evenly, though her lips pressed tight as if forcing out the words. "Just a glass of water with lemon," Elias replied calmly. A brief pause, the choice too humble for seat 1A. She turned away, saving her practiced smile for another passenger. Elias exhaled softly. He read the judgment in her every gesture, and he knew this was only the beginning. From across the cabin, a storm entered in the form of Victor Langford, 62, an oversized billionaire investor whose cologne suffocated the air. His shirt garish, his gold watch blinding. He threw a heavy briefcase onto seat 1B beside Elias, without a glance. When he spotted Margaret, his face cracked into a self-satisfied grin. "Margaret, darling." A 25-year-old Scotch, like always. In an instant, Margaret's frost melted into servile warmth, almost fawning. Victor leaned back, his eyes sweeping Elias with open contempt. He chuckled, dripping scorn. There must be some mistake. Seat 1A is always mine. Who let someone dressed like that sit here? The cabin grew heavy. Other passengers lowered their eyes to papers and tablets, but their ears strained to catch every word. Elias closed his book, set it neatly on the table, and lifted his gaze to Margaret. His eyes glinted with ice. "My boarding pass says 1A. I reserved it 6 weeks ago." Margaret swallowed hard. Victor waved a hand dismissively. "Give up the seat, kid. I'll buy you a drink." The word kid fell like a blade, steeped in derision. Elias did not flare. His voice dropped low, steady as steel. "My name is Elias Monroe, and I am not going anywhere." In his eyes, calm intertwined with fire. None of them knew that this seemingly ordinary man held the power to reroute the fate of the aircraft with a single phone call. But Margaret and Victor had no idea they had chosen the wrong man to target, and the price would be greater than anything they could imagine. The air in first class thickened, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the light. Every gaze, no matter how feigned in its indifference, was fixed on the first row. Seat 1A, where Elias Monroe sat unmoving, solid as stone. Margaret Doyle stood frozen for a moment, then forced her lips into a stiff, artificial smile. "Mr. Langford is a platinum client. He always chooses this seat." Her voice trailed off, still edged with the tone of command. Victor Langford burst out laughing, a booming, self-assured laugh that carried the weight of entitlement. He sipped his scotch and tapped the glass against the tray. "You heard her, didn't you? This seat has always been mine. A small system glitch, that's all. Be sensible and move to another seat. 4D, perhaps. Still first class. Don't make this hard for everyone." Elias closed his eyes for a second, drew a deep breath, then opened them again. His dark pupils burned with resolve, each word emerging slow and heavy as metal. "I will not move, Bill. This is my ticketed seat. If there is an error, check your system. But I will not leave this chair." The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the low hum of the engines outside filled the air, like the heartbeat of a storm edging closer. Margaret clutched her small leather logbook, her nails digging into its cover. In her eyes, Elias was not a rightful passenger, but a man daring to defy her authority in the territory she believed she ruled. What she could not accept was that a black man in plain clothes would challenge her in front of her powerful regulars. "You are obstructing the crew's work," Margaret hissed, her voice low. words sliding through clenched teeth. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to call the captain." Victor smirked, reclining with false impatience, his finger tapping idly against the glass. He watched with satisfaction, as though the ending had already been written. Elias sat upright, unmoved. He raised his eyes to Margaret, his calmness so steady it unsettled her. "Please do. I would like to hear the captain's opinion." Minutes later, footsteps pressed into the carpet. Captain Richard Hale appeared, a 55-year-old man with graying hair, carrying himself with the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. His presence pressed into the cabin like a weight. "What seems to be the issue, Margaret?" Richard asked, his eyes sweeping the cabin before resting on Elias. Even in that fleeting look, the familiar judgment revealed itself, the quick measure, the quiet dismissal. Margaret quickly narrated the scene in her own framing. "This passenger is in Mr. Langford's seat and refuses to move. I've tried to explain, but he won't cooperate." Richard nodded slightly, as if the matter were already clear. He turned to Elias, his tone stern. "Sir, we need you to move to seat 4D so we can depart on time." Elias met his gaze, his voice low yet unwavering. "Captain, my boarding pass clearly states seat 1A. I booked it 6 weeks ago. This is not my mistake, and it is no valid reason to force me from this seat." Richard frowned, the creases around his eyes deepening with irritation. He glanced toward Victor, who sat smiling smugly, then back at Elias. "Mr. Monroe, I trust my chief attendant. To avoid delays, I'm asking you to move." In that moment, Elias felt the raw truth. His word weighed less than a single frown from Victor. But he did not yield. He leaned back in his chair, his voice cutting cold. "You are ordering me to give up the seat I purchased legally, only to please another passenger. Then say it plainly. You are valuing me less than you value him." Richard faltered. For a heartbeat, his eyes wavered, for Elias had struck the precise nerve. Aviation law allowed removal only for safety, never to accommodate a VIP's whim. Yet hesitation quickly gave way to the easy choice, siding with the familiar power. "If you will not comply," Richard said, his voice hardening, "I will consider you a non-compliant passenger and have you removed from this flight." Victor's laughter rang through the cabin, mocking, triumphant. "Hear that? Best to get up before they call security." Elias's gaze turned to steel. He folded his book, set it on the table, lifted his head, and spoke slowly. "My name is Elias Monroe. I am not leaving this seat. But if you want to turn this into a bigger problem, I will let you make that choice. I will only remind you, once I make mine, the consequences will not be confined to this cabin." Margaret shivered, as if a cold wind had cut through the air. Instinctively, she averted her eyes. But Victor sneered louder, and Richard Hale stiffened, ready to end the dispute with force. None of them knew that in mere hours their shallow judgment would become the death sentence for their careers. Elias finally rose. His movements were deliberate, not conceding, but choreographed. He picked up his backpack, slipped on his hoodie, and walked toward seat 4D, leaving Victor to drop into 1A with a grin of victory. Yet in Elias's eyes, that grin was no triumph, but a verdict. For as soon as he sat in 4D, Elias unlocked his phone. His fingers moved quickly, precise, steady. An email, short and sharp, went out directly to his COO and CFO. The order? Cancel the $500 million contract with Global Lux Airlines. Liquidate shares. Terminate all corporate accounts. Just a few lines, yet sharp as a blade. Elias lifted his eyes, gaze calm as it swept the cabin. While Victor raised his scotch in smug delight, Elias whispered to himself, "An entire empire will pay for this moment of arrogance." The heavy plane lifted off the ground, cutting through the blanket of grey clouds. In first class, the boisterous laughter of Victor Langford drowned out every other sound. He raised his glass of scotch for the third time, reveling in a petty yet arrogant victory. Margaret Doyle moved with deliberate grace between the rows of seats, her earlier forced smile now reshaped into smugness. In her mind, the incident was over, neatly wrapped and forgotten. But deeper in the cabin, at seat 4D, an invisible storm had already begun to form. Elias Munro sat upright, his back pressed against the soft Italian leather, his eyes fixed on the pale blue glow of his phone. He wasn't scrolling social media, nor sending complaints. His fingers typed commands, short and sharp, without a wasted word. "Isabel, terminate all negotiations with Global Lux immediately. Daniel, liquidate GLA shares at market open. Close all corporate accounts. Deadline for a new partner, Monday. E." He pressed send. The email flew across high-speed Wi-Fi through the sky and landed squarely at Neurosphere headquarters in Palo Alto. In that instant, the gears of $1 trillion empire began to turn in reverse. At headquarters, the neon lights still glowed. Isabel Tran, the 39-year-old COO, with a face carved sharp and eyes like blades, was reviewing the day's reports. Her phone buzzed. One glance at the sender, and she straightened. Messages from Elias were never trivial. She read it, froze for just a second, then rose swiftly to her feet. "Daniel?" she called, her voice carrying the snap of a command. From the conference room, Daniel Cho, the 41-year-old CFO with the power to shake markets with a single phone call, stepped out. He skimmed the message, his eyes narrowing. "Sell everything? At the open?" Isabel nodded. "No holding back. He's decided." Daniel asked nothing further. They both knew. If Elias sent those words mid-flight, it wasn't anger. It was judgment. In the cabin, Elias closed his phone, his face smoothed of all expression. He shut his eyes, resting in the silence. But his ears picked up every arrogant quip from Victor, every sycophantic laugh from Margaret. In contrast, a little further down the aisle, Sophia Lane, a young flight attendant, was watching. She saw Margaret's favoritism, Victor's cruel smirk, and the cold restraint of Elias. Something in her chest tightened. The man in plain clothes was not like the bullied passengers she had seen before. There was something in his eyes that chilled her, the calm of someone holding real power. Her hand tightened unconsciously on her serving tray. In that moment, she could not imagine that within hours, her own choices would alter the course of her life forever. On the ground in New York, Harold Vance, CEO of Global Lux Airlines, was in a late-night boardroom when his phone buzzed relentlessly. His face tightened when he saw the sender's name. Elias Munro. The message was brief, cold as ice. Harold, I'm on Flight 72. We need to talk. But I'm afraid there's nothing left to discuss. Cold sweat trickled down Harold's back. He knew who Elias was. He knew Neurosphere was preparing to sign the $500 million Auraflight OS deal. He knew without it, Global Lux would fall behind in the race for aviation technology. And now Elias had implied that everything was about to crumble. Harold dialed immediately. The line rang. No answer. He tried again. This time, a steady, low voice answered. Harold. Harold shot to his feet and rushed into the empty hallway. Elias, what happened? Was there a technical issue? Did a staff member upset you? Tell me, please. I'll fix it right away. In seat 4D, Elias opened his eyes, gazing through the window at the roiling grey clouds. His voice was even, unshaken. Not technical. Human. Your chief attendant, your captain, and the passenger they valued more than fairness. They forced me out of the seat I paid for, to please a familiar face. They didn't see who I was. They only saw my skin, my clothes. On the other end, Harold went silent. In those seconds, he could hear his career collapsing into dust. Elias. His voice trembled. I'm sorry. This was a mistake, a failing of a few individuals. It doesn't reflect Global Lux's culture. I promise they'll be disciplined. But please, please don't cancel the contract. Elias allowed himself a thin smile, one that never touched his eyes. Your apology won't save a rotten culture. I've already given the order. Negotiations are over. Your shares will be sold off tomorrow. And Harold, I'll give you 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Harold nearly screamed. 5 minutes for your captain to announce that Flight 72 is turning back to Newark. If not, consider it over forever. The call ended. Harold stood frozen in the hallway, his heart hammering, his mind scrambling for escape. Just 5 minutes to save an empire. High over the Atlantic, the digital clock on the cabin display ticked forward. 4:12. Elias sat still, his eyes half closed, calm to the point of menace. 4:13. Margaret leaned toward Victor, the two sharing a private laugh. 4:14. Sophia glanced at Elias, then at the cockpit door, dread rising in her chest. 4:15. A chime sounded, signaling an announcement. The cabin fell silent. The voice of Captain Richard Hale came through, stripped of authority, trembling as if crushed. Ladies and gentlemen, due to urgent operational requirements, Flight 72 must return to Newark. A silent shock rippled through the cabin. Victor shot to his feet, shouting, "What? Turn back! I have a meeting in London. This is outrageous!" Margaret stared at him in panic, while Sophia's breath came short. Only one man remained perfectly calm. Elias sat still, lips pressed into a thin line. In his eyes, a cold light flared. Global Lux's death sentence had arrived. The massive aircraft tilted, its engines roaring into the night. Over the Atlantic, the sky was thick with darkness, broken only by the scattered glow of navigation lights. In first class, the announcement of the return felt like a bomb detonating inside a shell of luxury. Whispers rippled through the cabin. A silver-haired lady, clutched her pearl necklace, whispering in shock. Turn back? In the middle of the ocean? A Japanese businessman furrowed his brow, his hand gripping a financial paper tightly. The passengers tried to maintain composure, but their eyes betrayed their unease. Victor Langford, however, could not contain himself. He shot to his feet, his face flushed crimson. Impossible. I paid tens of thousands for this flight. I have a conference in London tomorrow morning. Turning back is absurd. Who allowed this? Margaret Doyle, the chief purser, stood frozen. Her earlier arrogance had drained away, replaced by raw panic. She staggered towards the cockpit, knocking furiously, her voice low but trembling. Captain, what is going on? Why are we turning back? Is there a technical failure? The door stayed shut. No answer. Sophia Lane, the young attendant, looked at Elias Munro. He sat still, eyes closed as if resting, unmoved by the chaos swelling around him. It was his calm that chilled her the most. Instinct told her the truth. The quiet man in plain clothes held the answer to everything. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Hale sat rigid. On the screen before him, the route had already been changed. In his headset, Harold Vance's voice, heavy as lead, echoed, "You made the biggest mistake of your career, Richard. You threw out the wrong man. Elias Munro is Neurosphere. He just cancelled a $500 million contract. If you don't turn the plane back now, Global Lux will be erased from the market tomorrow. Do you understand?" Sweat slid down Richard's temple. His hands trembled on the controls. In over 3 decades of flying, he had faced storms, engine failures, even an emergency landing once, yet never had his career felt this fragile. 2 hours later, the lights of Newark twinkled faintly through the windows. In the cabin, fatigue mixed with anger. Passengers sat rigid, lips pressed tight, eyes flashing resentment. Sighs echoed softly, one after another. When the wheels struck the runway, there was no customary applause. Only a suffocating silence. No smooth jet bridge. A cold stair truck rolled into place. Blue and red security lights flashed outside. Margaret felt her stomach drop. This isn't normal. She turned to Victor, searching for reassurance. But Victor was raging at another attendant. "I'll sue. I'll cancel my membership. I have friends in Congress. The whole world will hear about this." No one answered him. The door opened. A gust of cold night air swept in. The passengers held their breath as a line of men in black suits boarded. Leading them was Harold Vance, CEO of Global Lux, his face ashen. Beside him were 2 senior vice presidents and HR executives. His eyes did not fall on Victor or Margaret, but locked directly onto seat 4D. Elias Munro stood. No introduction was needed. The stunned silence of the cabin confirmed it. The man in the simple hoodie was the one who held the airline's fate in his hands. Harold Vance strode forward, bowing his head slightly, his voice hoarse and grave. "Mr. Munro, I apologize. On behalf of Global Lux, I take full responsibility. You were treated in a way that is unacceptable." The cabin went utterly silent. Passengers nearby gaped in disbelief. Margaret stood paralyzed. In an instant, the pieces crashed together in her mind. The calm smile, the unshaken gaze, the steady words. She had not defied an ordinary passenger, but a man who could erase her entire career with a single keystroke. Harold turned toward Margaret and Captain Richard Hale. His voice hardened into steel. "Hand me your badges and credentials. Right now." Richard's old hands trembled as he unpinned the silver wings from his chest. Margaret stammered, I only... Mr. Langford is a loyal customer. I didn't." "Enough," Harold cut her off. "You just cost this company the largest contract in its history. Your careers end here." A strangled sob escaped Margaret. She handed over her badge, eyes wide, pleading. Harold didn't glance at her. Victor Langford exploded. "This is insane! I am platinum! You can't treat me like this!" Harold turned, his eyes filled with contempt. "Mr. Langford, it was your arrogance that sparked this disaster. Your platinum status is revoked immediately. You are banned from Global Lux. Permanently." Victor froze, his face drained of color. He looked around for help, but met only disdain and distance. In the stillness, Elias slipped on his hoodie, picked up his worn leather bag. As he passed Harold, he gave a slight nod. "I'll have my team contact yours. But Harold, this isn't over. Today is only the beginning." He descended the stairs into the cold night, leaving behind broken careers and an airline on the edge of collapse. In the cabin, Sophia Lane watched his silhouette fade into the darkness. Her heart pounded, filling with a strange blend of awe and hope. She knew. The real storm had only just begun. The news did not leak. It exploded. As the car carried Elias Monroe away from Newark Airport, the online world was already in uproar. A business-class passenger, as discreet as a guerrilla fighter, had captured the moment Harold Vance, CEO of Global Lux, boarded the plane, stripped Captain Richard Hale and Chief Purser Margaret Doyle of their employee badges, and fired them in front of stunned passengers. The 90-second clip spread like wildfire. Headlines blazed across social media. Mysterious CEO thrown from first class. Result, entire flight crew fired on the spot. Hashtags, #Flight72, #Global Lux Crash, #Hoodie Billionaire flooded every feed. In a Manhattan hotel room, Elias sat in the dim glow of the city, a coffee cup in hand, eyes fixed on his phone screen. He had never sought fame, but he knew this wave could not be stopped. At exactly 9 a.m. California time, Neurosphere's press release appeared on Bloomberg and Reuters. Neurosphere Technologies immediately terminates all negotiations and partnerships with Global Lux Airlines, citing irreconcilable values and unacceptable service standards. The company has also liquidated all GLA holdings on the stock exchange. The words were cold and sharp, like a scalpel slicing open the heart of a corporation. Within 10 minutes, the New York Stock Exchange was in turmoil. GLA stock plummeted, losing over $180 million in market value within the first hour. Investors frantically dumped shares, financial media calling it a textbook collapse. Meanwhile, in the upper floors of Global Lux headquarters, Harold Vance clawed at his hair, his face ashen. He had just slammed down the phone after the 10th call from furious investors. Cold sweat drenched him as Elias's words from the night before echoed in his mind. 5 minutes, Harold. You had 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes had cost him everything. A trembling vice president handed him a report. "Sir, customers are cancelling tickets en masse. The call center is overloaded. Media outlets are calling this the worst crisis in the company's history." Harold shut his eyes. He saw a vast, yawning darkness swallowing the empire he had built. Margaret Doyle, the 58-year-old chief purser, now sat curled up in her modest New Jersey apartment. Her laptop screen flooded with her face plastered under the label, "The Face of Discrimination." Her home address had been leaked, her inbox overflowing with abuse. She wept hoarsely, attempting to justify herself to a tabloid reporter. "I only followed VIP protocol. I wasn't discriminating." But her voice only poured fuel onto the fire. The public would not forgive. The airline would not forgive. Captain Richard Hale vanished from the media. His license was suspended. The FAA launched an investigation. In pilot circles, his name became shorthand for an unforgivable mistake. 30 years of flying gone in an instant, undone by one unjust decision in first class. As for Victor Langford, once smug in seat 1A, he now faced backlash within his own investment firm. Pension funds announced divestment. The press labeled him the giant who lost his seat. Langford Capital trembled. Amid the storm, a small light flickered. Sophia Lane, the young attendant who had quietly offered Elias a glass of lemon water with genuine kindness, received an unexpected letter. Not from Global Lux, but from Neurosphere. Inside was an employment contract for an event and logistics manager role at double her current salary. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Elias. "Kindness in a storm is rare. Come work with us." Sophia held the letter, her hands trembling, tears blurring her vision. In the darkest hour of crisis, a new path had opened, simply because she had chosen fairness for a man who had seemed ordinary. Back in his hotel room, Elias sat by the window, watching Manhattan's lights flicker like stars at his feet. He did not feel triumph, only a deep weariness. He had no desire to be a symbol. But the prejudice he faced last night was not only aimed at him, it was aimed at millions who had been overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside because of appearance or skin color. This time, he chose not to stay silent. His phone buzzed. Isabel Tran called from Palo Alto. "Everything is under control. GLA stock is in free fall. The press is casting you as a symbol against discrimination. Do you want to give an interview?" Elias shook his head, his voice rough with fatigue. "No, they don't need to hear me speak. They need to see Global Lux change." He set the phone down, closed his eyes, and let the sounds of the city rise from the avenue below. A battle had begun. Tomorrow, he would rewrite the rules, not just for one airline, but for the entire industry. In the darkness, Global Lux staggered like a plane without a compass. And Elias Monroe, the quiet man in a hoodie, had become the storm that brought a towering empire to its knees. Dawn painted the glass towers of New York gold, but in the top office of Global Lux, that light could not chase away the gloom. Harold Vance sat slumped at his desk, fingers interlocked, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He had not slept. Neither had the company. Every ringing phone was another blade to the heart. Investors fleeing, customers cancelling flights, stock plunging. Minute by minute, the airline empire he had spent a lifetime building was collapsing like a sand castle. In another apartment, Margaret Doyle had also gone sleepless. Her laptop stayed open through the night, flooded with messages of hatred. Online, people paired her photo with captions: "The face of prejudice," "The Iron Lady who destroyed an airline." Margaret screamed, pounding her desk, but the sound echoed uselessly within the cramped apartment. No one was listening anymore. Richard Hale, the veteran captain, had disappeared into silence. In his suburban home, he stared at the silver wings resting on the table. 30 years of flying across the skies, countless brushes with danger, and now everything erased by one unjust decision. His wife wept quietly in the kitchen. His son sent a single message: "What did you do? Everyone at school knows." Richard sat hollow-eyed, knowing his career and his honor had turned to ash. Victor Langford faced a storm of his own. On Wall Street, his name was now shackled to the phrase, "the giant who lost his seat." Investors demanded mass withdrawals from Langford Capital. In the boardroom, the same partners who once cheered him on now coldly urged him to temporarily step down as CEO to contain the media crisis. Victor roared, "I am Langford! I built this empire!" But the only reply was the chill of indifferent stares. The throne he had seized with ruthless ambition had turned into an electric chair, burning away all his power. Meanwhile, in Palo Alto, Neurosphere's headquarters thrummed like a great engine newly charged. Isabel Tran and Daniel Cho executed Elias's directives with precision. On the screen, GLA stock glowed red, signaling collapse. "We are not just pulling out," Isabel said, eyes blazing. "We are seizing their heartbeat. Buy up their debt as much as possible." Daniel nodded. "They will soon understand we are not just the customer they lost. We are their new creditor." Phones rang in rapid succession. Orders flowed. Within hours, Neurosphere had become the largest holder of Global Lux corporate debt. The irony was sharp. The airline that had scorned the CEO in seat 1A now had to beg for breath from his hand. In his Manhattan hotel room, Elias Monroe watched it all unfold with quiet eyes. No triumph, no glee, only inevitability. He recalled Margaret's downward gaze, Victor's sweeping arrogance, Richard's threat to expel him from the plane. They had all believed power lay in uniforms, VIP cards, age, and connections. But true power needed no display. It was a river flowing beneath the surface, waiting for a crack to burst forth. Elias lifted the phone, dialed. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Harold, tomorrow morning I will see you in Palo Alto. We will renegotiate terms. But this time, the rules are mine." On the other end, Harold swallowed hard. He knew there was no retreat left. By noon, American media was ablaze. CNN looped the video from the first-class cabin. Fox News screamed, "When Seat 1A can shake an entire industry." The Wall Street Journal analyzed market impact, calling it the most expensive cultural lesson in history. In cafes, people whispered, "He wore just a hoodie," and they dared to dismiss him. Incredible. He's the tech billionaire behind Neurosphere. justice delivered right in the sky. Elias became an unwilling icon. His image in a plain grey hoodie spread across every front page, paired with headlines like "The Hoodie Billionaire," "The Man Who Bought Out an Airline Just for Being Underestimated." That night, in her small apartment, Sophia Lane read Elias's letter over and over. Tears streaked her smiling face. She remembered his eyes, calm, yet deep as an abyss. It was that look that had driven her to treat him with kindness, without prejudice, without scorn. And now, that small act of kindness had opened an entirely new path. Across the country, Elias closed his laptop, exhaling slowly. In the moonlight pouring through the window, his face was clear, resolute, but carrying a quiet sorrow. He had never sought victory through humiliation. But sometimes, to force a system to change, it required a shock, a costly lesson. And that lesson had just begun to take root in the heart of the aviation industry. The Palo Alto morning blazed with sunlight, but inside the headquarters of Neurosphere Technologies, the air was as heavy as a courtroom. On the top floor, in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking Silicon Valley, the fate of Global Lux Airlines was about to be decided. Harold Vance entered, his figure drained of all strength. His face was gaunt, dark shadows under his eyes. His suit remained immaculate, but the aura of a CEO was gone. Each step dragged the weight of decades of reputation, now on the verge of burial. Behind him trailed two senior vice presidents, their faces pale, none daring to meet another's eyes. At the head of the table sat Elias Monroe. A grey hoodie, black jeans, as simple as ever. Yet his eyes, sharp and steady, filled the room with silence. Beside him, Isabel Tran and Daniel Cho waited, stacks of thick documents before them like ammunition ready to be fired. "Sit," Elias said quietly, but the word landed like a command. Harold lowered himself into a chair, hands trembling against the polished wood table. For a moment, he felt less like a CEO than a defendant awaiting judgment. Elias opened his laptop and turned the screen toward Harold. A chart glowed red. Global Lux stock plunging, hundreds of millions in market value wiped away in just 24 hours. "This is the price of seat 1A, Elias said evenly. One seat, one act of prejudice, one complicit silence. Together, they add up to collapse. Harold's head dropped. He stammered, I apologize. I will do anything to repair this. Please don't kill Global Lux." Elias leaned back, fingers interlaced. Repair? Harold, this is not a small fix. This is major surgery. If you agree, Neurosphere will not destroy Global Lux, but the rules will change. Isabel slid a heavy dossier across the table, the sound slicing the air like a blade. "First condition," Elias said, eyes locked on Harold. "Neurosphere will become a strategic shareholder, holding 20% of Global Lux. We are no longer your customer. We are your owner." Harold swallowed hard, fighting to stay composed. 20% meant real power, enough to dictate policy. But he dared not resist. "Second condition," Elias continued, his voice dropping lower. "We launch a reform program called Flight for All. All 40,000 employees, from pilots to executives, will undergo retraining. The theme, Dignity is the only platinum status. Human dignity is the only class that matters. A vice president tried to protest. But the cost, the time, Isabel cut in, voice like steel. This is not a proposal, it is an order. Harold nodded quickly, sweat dripping. Third condition, Elias said, his tone soft yet burning. Global Lux will establish an aviation scholarship fund, supporting young people from underserved communities. Because opportunity must not be distributed by skin color or expensive suits. It must be built on fairness. The boardroom fell into absolute silence. No one dared object. Elias rose slowly, walking toward the window. Outside, California light poured down, illuminating his face. He turned back, his voice ringing out. You dismissed me because of a hoodie. But from today, this hoodie will be the mark of change. Global Lux will become a living lesson for the entire airline industry. If you accept, I will save you. If not, tomorrow Neurosphere will liquidate what remains, and you will watch your airline turn to ashes. Harold lifted his head, trembling. He looked into Elias's eyes, the eyes of a man once underestimated, but now wielding unchallenged power. And he understood there was no choice. We agree, Harold whispered, his voice breaking. Elias nodded, his gaze not triumphant but steady, like a surgeon laying down his scalpel. Good. From today, we are partners. But remember this, I do not work with lies. I work with true change. He turned and left. Harold slumped in his chair, shoulders heavy, like a man who had just signed his own death sentence, yet also been granted a chance at resurrection. In the hallway, Isabel whispered, "Do you think they can pull this off?" Elias answered, his voice rough but firm. If they do not, we will. And when that time comes, Global Lux will no longer exist. He walked on, morning light wrapping around his figure, sketching the image of a man once dismissed, who had turned scorn into the force that brought an entire industry to its knees. In the days that followed, Global Lux Airlines resembled a battered ship caught in a storm. But instead of sinking, it began a transformation unlike anything the airline industry had ever seen. Giant banners reading "Flight for All" appeared in every office, every lounge, every training center. Beneath the slogan was a line written by Elias Monroe himself. Human dignity is the only platinum status. From junior flight attendants and veteran pilots to senior executives, all were required to participate in weeks of retraining. No exemptions, no exceptions. In a small classroom in Houston, dozens of uniformed flight attendants sat in silence. A diversity and equity expert projected footage from Flight 72. Margaret Doyle appeared on screen, cold-faced, her voice sharp, her eyes filled with contempt as she confronted Elias. This, the instructor said, is the moment when a person was valued less than a VIP membership card. What do you think? The room fell silent. A young attendant raised her hand, eyes brimming with tears. I feel afraid, because any one of us could make that same mistake if we do not learn to see people with respect first. The instructor nodded. Exactly. The Flight 72 incident was not just a PR disaster. It was a wake-up call. From now on, you are not simply serving passengers. You are protecting their dignity. In New Jersey, Margaret Doyle sat in front of her TV, watching her image played over and over. A national broadcast called her the textbook example of arrogance and bias. She buried her face in her hands, tears soaking her palms. 35 years of service had ended in a stain that could never be erased. Meanwhile, Captain Richard Hale had his license suspended by the FAA. At 55, he sat on his porch, staring at the sky he had once flown across. His silver wings now sat inside a wooden box, cold and meaningless. Victor Langford, the man who once treated Seat 1A as his private territory, now faced financial ruin. The board forced him to step down, and the press labeled him the Emperor without a throne. At lavish parties, his name had become a cruel punchline. In contrast, a new star emerged. Sophia Lane, the young flight attendant who had once handed Elias a glass of lemon water, now walked into the headquarters of Neurosphere. Wearing a crisp white shirt and a gleaming name badge, she was welcomed as a new member of the senior logistics team. In her hand, she still held the note handwritten by Elias. "Kindness in the storm is rare. Come join us." Each time she read it, her chest filled with hope. A small act, a genuine smile, had rewritten her entire future. International media exploded with stories of the reform. The New York Times ran the headline, "From First Class to Corporate Revolution, Global Lux Reborn Under Neurosphere." And Forbes wrote, "The $500 million lesson, when a billionaire in a hoodie redefines corporate culture." Global Lux's training videos spread as reference material for other corporations. Rival airlines watched closely, while many tech companies quietly adopted the motto, "Dignity is the only platinum status," as their own internal standard. Elias Munro became an unwilling symbol. People called him the hoodie billionaire, but in his heart he sought no spotlight. At a press conference, a reporter asked, "Do you feel like a hero, having forced an entire industry to change?" Elias answered simply, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a passenger asking for the simplest thing, to be respected. If one person has to pay such a high price to get that, then the entire system is wrong." The statement spread across social media, shared millions of times. In his glass-walled office, Elias stood by the window, gazing toward the horizon of Silicon Valley. Isabel entered, placing a report on his desk. "Harold has signed all the conditions. The Flight for All program is launching worldwide. Public outrage is beginning to ease. Their stock is slowly recovering thanks to renewed trust in reform. We did it." Elias nodded slightly, eyes still fixed on the distance. There was no thrill of victory in his gaze, only contemplation. He knew this was not the destination. It was only the beginning of a much longer journey. "We did not save an airline," Elias said quietly. "We are teaching an entire industry a lesson about human dignity." Outside, the California sun blazed, its light reflecting off the glass and outlining the figure of a man once scorned in first class. But it was that very scorn that had sparked a fire bright enough to ignite a revolution. The story of Flight 72 did not stop at America's borders. It spread across the world like an earthquake. In Europe, major airlines called emergency meetings. A leaked internal memo from Lufthansa read, "All crews must be reminded. Every passenger must be treated fairly, regardless of status, ethnicity, or appearance." We cannot allow a Flight 72 of our own. In Asia, Japanese media analyzed the event as a textbook example of loss of company face, something even worse than financial damage. Japanese airlines issued statements pledging to adopt dignity-first training programs. In London, a member of Parliament addressed the House. When a billionaire in a hoodie is humiliated simply because of his appearance, we must ask ourselves, how many ordinary people have experienced the same with no one to witness it? Flight 72 is not just an aviation story. It is a mirror held up to society. Across global media, Elias Monroe became an unwilling symbol. His image, the grey hoodie, the calm gaze, blanketed magazines worldwide. The Guardian called him the man who bought an entire industry with silence. CNN remarked, when he chose not to shout, but to let actions speak, that was true power. Yet inside his Palo Alto office, Elias maintained a simple rhythm of life. He arrived early, drank black coffee, opened his laptop, and focused on long-term plans. He avoided interviews and turned down invitations to talk shows. For him, fame was dust carried by the wind. Only change was a true legacy. Isabel Tran urged him more than once. "You should take this chance, Elias. The public wants to hear you." Elias shook his head with a weary smile. "I don't want them to hear my voice. I want them to hear the echo of change." Meanwhile, global Lux slowly recovered under Neurosphere's pressure. Flight for All training videos were released publicly, becoming free reference materials. Other companies began downloading them, applying the lessons to their own staff. A Korean newspaper wrote, "The global Lux story has become a textbook for the next generation of business leaders. Brand value is no longer measured by logos, but by how you treat people." In a small cafe in New Jersey, Margaret Doyle sat alone, a cap pulled low over her face. She flipped through newspapers, every page bearing her name. Across the room, a group of young people whispered and pointed. Margaret left quietly, her heart filled with bitterness. In the suburbs, Richard Hale cleared out his garage. He placed his silver wings inside a wooden box and locked it. Before closing the lid, he looked at them one last time, eyes burning with regret. A chapter of his life had ended. As for Victor Langford, he nearly disappeared from public view. Rumors spread that he had been forced to sell most of his shares in his investment fund. The man who once barked orders in first class now had only silence left. In contrast, Sophia Lane stepped into a completely new path. At Neurosphere, she was assigned to coordinate a major event, a global conference on AI and aviation. Standing before a hall of hundreds, Sophia gripped the microphone with trembling hands, but her eyes shone bright. "There is one thing I have learned," she said, her voice carrying into the silence. "A glass of lemon water may mean nothing to some, but to the right person, in the right moment, it is a reminder that kindness still exists, and sometimes that small kindness can change an entire world." The hall erupted in applause. Elias stood in the back, quietly observing. He did not step onto the stage, nor seek the spotlight, but in his eyes the light of belief glowed. The story of Flight 72 gradually became legend. Business schools added it to their curriculum under the title Case Study: The Value of Human Dignity in Management. Students debated, researchers analyzed, CEOs cited it in speeches. A year later, Harvard Business Review ran the headline, "Flight 72, the $500 million lesson on the cost of bias." Elias skimmed the article, then closed the magazine. He did not smile. He only exhaled softly. Deep within, he carried a quiet fatigue. That it took a global shock for people to finally learn that respect should never be a privilege, but a basic right. He turned to the window, watching the sunset blanket Silicon Valley in golden light. And in that moment, he knew this journey was not over. Flight 72 was not a period, but a comma, opening the next chapter for an entire industry. 1 year after Flight 72, the skies seemed clearer. Not because of the weather, but because the entire airline industry had been transformed. At Newark International Airport, a massive sign hung above the Global Lux Airlines check, in area with the words, "Dignity is the only platinum status." Passengers stopped to take pictures and shared them on social media. To many, it was more than a slogan. It was proof of real change. In a newly built training hall, hundreds of Global Lux employees sat in silence, watching clips from Flight 72 replayed on the screen. Margaret Doyle's stern face, Captain Hale's authoritative voice, and the image of Elias being forced from seat 1A. But this time, they did not look with judgment. They looked with understanding. The instructor asked, "What do you see in the eyes of that passenger?" A young flight attendant answered, "Calmness, but also a warning." He did not need to shout to prove himself. He knew his own worth. The lesson sank in. Respect cannot be optional. It must be a duty. Meanwhile, Elias Monroe remained quiet. He declined most media invitations and did not attend glamorous award ceremonies. Instead, he focused on building the Aviation Scholarship Fund. Young men and women from poor neighborhoods whose dreams of flying had been grounded by cost now had the chance to reach the skies. An 18-year-old girl receiving her scholarship broke into tears at the ceremony. "I never believed I could become a pilot. Thank you for believing in me," when the world turned away. Elias listened, his face softening. That was the true reward, to see kindness multiply. In Palo Alto, a closed-door meeting took place. Isabel reported, "Global Lux stock has recovered. Public trust is returning. Flight for All has become a global model. They are no longer the same airline. They are being reborn." Daniel Cho added, "Other industries are learning too. Hotels, banks, even hospitals. Flight 72 has become a domino effect." Elias nodded slightly. He did not smile, but a spark lit in his eyes. This was what he had wanted, not just to change an airline, but to force an entire system to look in the mirror. In New Jersey, Margaret Doyle lived in seclusion. Each time she stepped outside, she still felt people staring, pointing. And in long nights, she admitted to herself, "I was wrong." Regret clung to her like a shadow. Richard Hale had turned to teaching young pilots. In his first class, he told the story of Flight 72 with a trembling voice. "Remember, the true power of a pilot does not lie in the cockpit seat, but in how we respect every passenger." The students sat in silence. For them, that lesson was worth more than any flying hours. Victor Langford, after vanishing for a time, finally appeared at a financial conference, not as a keynote speaker, but as a guest in the back row. No one greeted him. The man who once believed he could buy the world was now just a remnant of an arrogant past. In contrast, Sophia Lane was on a new journey. At an international aviation technology conference hosted by Neurosphere, she stood on stage, presenting the organization of a global event. Facing hundreds of industry leaders, Sophia still remembered the moment she handed Elias a glass of lemon water on Flight 72, a small act that had changed her destiny. After the presentation, Elias shook her hand and said quietly, "Your kindness was the beginning of everything." Sophia smiled, tears glistening. When night fell over Silicon Valley, Elias sat alone by his office window. The city glowed like an inverted sky full of stars. He sipped his black coffee, his eyes deep in thought. He remembered the moment he was forced from his seat, the mocking stares, the sneering laughter. If he had shouted that day, perhaps it would have ended as nothing more than a scuffle in a cabin. But he had chosen silence, chosen to let action speak, and that silence created a global shockwave. Deep down, Elias knew he was not a hero. He was proof that sometimes, to change the world, one does not need to shout. One only needs to stand firm and ensure that those who show contempt pay the price. He whispered to himself, Flight 72 was not just a lesson for global lux. It was a lesson for everyone. That respect is the only fuel that can keep humanity flying high. Outside, the wind swept through the valley, and in the shimmering night, the silhouette of a man in a simple hoodie stood as a quiet symbol, a symbol of justice, of dignity, and of a better world. In a world where a first-class seat can shake an entire industry, the story of Elias Monroe reminds us of one truth. Power does not lie in outward glamour, but in the way we treat one another. A single act of disdain can bring down an empire, yet one gesture of kindness can change a life. If you believe that human dignity must always be the only true platinum status, press like to spread this message. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next stories about justice, dignity, and transformation. And leave a comment with just the words dignity to remind the world that we all deserve respect, no matter where we are.